So James, the comrade, has been elected in New York
Yes.
City, and
Glory to
now
the
everything's going to
revolution.
change. It's just going to be, so much better.
Of course, I can feel it already. Yeah,
It's
I
like when
mean
Obama got elected, and they were like, "Oh, I don't have to pay my rent anymore. I don't
I'm
have
gonna
to."
I don't have to pay my rent. I don't have to pay my gas. I don't have to pay my electric
Yeah.
bill. Uh, I mean the interviews have been hilarious. There's people going around interviewing people in New York City in the same way that I remember they were interviewing people after Obama got elected, and they're like, he's gonna do this. He's gonna pay my rent. He's gonna pay my this. He's gonna pay my that. And then somebody's like, how's he gonna pay for it? I don't know. He's just going to pay for it. But be like, where's he going to get the money? And I remember it was like one person I interviewed goes, I don't know, his stash. He's got a stash. He's got a stash of money, and that's what he's going to use to pay everybody's rent. Um, there's like a couple guys going around interviewing people in New York City about Mamdani, and they're like, they're like, well, he's a socialist. He goes, yeah, yeah, I think we should give that a try. There's some good things about socialism. Like, what's your favorite example of socialism around the world? They're like, he's like, what is it like? Is it like the Soviet Union? Is it Venezuela? Is it Cuba? There's one guy who goes, yeah, man, I don't, there's just so much information in my brain. I'm gonna have to go with Cuba. Cuba's the best example of
It's a
and
beautiful
it's just
island.
like,
I mean,
and
it's a good one to pick.
they it's just people have no idea what they're doing. I mean, the example that we wrote about is we said, just imagine, right? You've got a family-owned business, right? Like hundreds of years ago, some people started this business. Your long lost ancestors started a business, and it became one of the most successful businesses in the world. And ever since, generations and generations, generations. Now you've got thousands and thousands of cousins, and everybody's got a piece of this business. And your business, this family-owned business, is far from its glory days. I mean, it's been in decline for a long time, but it still has a powerful brand. But it's a large and complicated structure. It's a business structure. It's large, complicated organization. You got tens of thousands of employees and tens of billions of dollars in revenue, and it's losing money. But it's still got a brand, and you and everybody kind of believes like, hey, we can turn this around. But everybody agrees like it's not going well, and we need change. And so you start looking around and you're saying like, well, let's bring in a new CEO. And to your astonishment, the CEO candidate that is energizing all of your fellow stakeholders in this business is a guy who's never had a job, who's never had an employee, who's never had to run an organization before, who can barely manage his own finances, let alone the finances of a business, and who actively hates business. This is a guy who's going out, giving speeches, talking about, businesses are evil and all these things. And, and you're looking around going like, does anybody think that this guy, I mean, he has a winning smile. He's charismatic. He's got a lot of energy. He ticks a lot of diversity and inclusion boxes. But I mean, is there anybody who's actually going to look and say, guy with no experience, never hired anybody, never run an organization, actively hates business. We're going to put him in charge of the business. Can't manage a budget, can't manage an organization, but this guy's going to be in charge. Does anybody think that you're going to turn this business around? Does anybody think that you're actually going to take this old story brand that was once so great and powerful that is in decline, and you're going to be able to arrest the decline, turn around and make it this prominent brand once again? You've got to be a crazy person to expect that to be the case, especially when you look at his policies, and his policies are basically, let's make things even less shareholder friendly. Let's make things less customer friendly. Let's lose even more money. And these are his policy ideas. And then you really start actually scrutinizing the policy ideas and realize you're not even going to be able to implement most of these things. And you realize most of this guy, all he wants to do in his business agenda is, pick fights with other businesses, and pick fights with other CEOs. And it's like, who's dumb enough to think that this is the guy who's going to turn things around? But this is what they did in New York City. This is what they did in New York City. I mean, and it's I if you kind of look to political and electoral history It's not a hard and fast rule, but the reality is a lot of times the person who people think is going to be so terrible isn't as bad as people sort of anticipate. He's bad, but he's not as bad as people anticipate. It also works the same way with somebody that people think is going to be good. Everybody, you mentioned Obama. Like when Obama was elected, people thought he was going to walk across the water and, just sort of lift his countenance upon the nation and see that it was good. And on the seventh day, he would rest. And it just didn't work out that way. And there are a lot of things that just ended up being disastrous. And you know, nobody's ever as good as they think. Nobody's ever as bad as they think. And quite often, it's the people that are middle of the road. It's the Joe Bidens of the world. It's the Gavin Newsoms of the world. It's people that were elected. When they were elected, they were kind of, middle of the road, center left, left of center. And they end up being hardcore communists, super wokist, ultra progressives, and run the place in the ground. And people go like, "Well, wait a minute! Like you're supposed to be, Biden was supposed to be the transition guy. Biden was supposed to be middle of the road Joe, who just, all you got to do is sleep your way through the next 4 years. Don't screw anything up too bad, and you've done your job." But instead, he thought he was the second coming of FDR and ended up being the second coming of Lenin with all the things that he was trying to do. And I think those are often the most dangerous ones. And the
Do
reality
you
is
think
that
they end up as like vehicles for people behind the scenes? Because you're also talking about how Mamdani has no experience as an executive, and yet he's going to have to run this giant organization. Is there just going to be other people around him who are going to be able to take the reins, which is obviously what happened with Biden as well?
yeah, I mean, that's obviously what happened with Biden. The thing is, they were able to do that with Biden because, I mean, dementia, right? I mean, it's like this guy didn't even know where he was half the time, turn around and shaking hands with thin air and all these things. Like he just wasn't there. And there were people in the White House that were able to exploit that. He's a young guy. So I mean, it'll only happen if he allows it to happen. And I think the thing about power is that once you have it, it's from my cold dead hands. Nobody wants to let it go. I mean, nobody wants to go through all that trouble running for office only to hand the reins of power over to somebody else. There are only a handful of cases like that. In let's say modern American history. I don't think he's that guy. I think he legitimately wants to and hopes to implement all of these policies. But if you scrutinize his policies and you scrutinize these ideas, they just don't hold up. They don't hold up to any scrutiny at all. And I can't like I hate these words coming out of my mouth, but I mean like Andrew Cuomo, who I think is just in many respects, just a horrible, disgusting human being. That is just, he slithered his way down from Albany, into New York City to run for mayor. And it was amazing. So many people on the right were rooting for Andrew Cuomo. I mean, that's how bad the situation
Oh,
is
I
that
love the
people were
the Babylon Bee article was New York elderly New York Jews vote between somebody who wants to kill them for being Jews and somebody who wants to kill them for being elderly.
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would remind everybody that Cuomo was the guy who won an Emmy. He won a primetime Emmy for or it was, I don't know if it was a daytime Emmy or primetime Emmy, but he was won an Emmy for like his COVID briefings, his like daily COVID briefings, and actually wrote a book about leadership, and going and sending all these old people to their deaths and locking down the Jews, preventing Jews from going to synagogue while saying like, oh, if you want to go and smoke weed, we're going to leave the cannabis dispensaries open, but that's leadership, for the left, and this is a guy that people were rooting for because he was actually the lesser of the two evils, which is really saying something. And Cuomo called him out on it, and he said, "You can't do any of this stuff that you're talking about. I mean, you could pretend to give away the buses for free, and you could pretend to do this like healthcare, but how are you going to pay for it?" He says, "Oh, we're going to raise taxes." He goes, "You can't raise the taxes. You have to go to Albany. You've got to go to the state legislature, convince a majority in the state legislature to raise the state corporate tax to keep up with New Jersey, because that's of course that's a successful economic model. Say, well, hey, if New Jersey can do it, we can get away with it as well. Are you not aware of the countless people, the businesses, the productive individuals that are fleeing New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all these places, and they're going to Florida, and they're going to Tennessee, and they're going to Texas, and they're going even to Georgia and different places because they're just tired of it. They're just tired of it. And Cuomo at least got it, and he said, You just can't do that. You've got to go to, you don't even have the authority to do that. You have to go to Albany. It's a state issue. You've got to convince the state legislature to do it. Then you got to convince the governor to sign off on it, that they're going to go and raise the corporate tax and then give you all the money. They're going to collect all this tax revenue and then ship it all down to New York City so that you can give people in New York City, so you can have people in Buffalo and Binghamton and Schenectady and Oneonta and all these different places paying for free bus fare in New York City. I don't even think the communists in Albany would go in for that. And the fact that he's like, oh yeah, we're just going to do that. Then he was saying, oh, we're gonna raise these taxes, and we're not just going to tax businesses that are based in New York. We're going to tax businesses that do business in New York. So he's essentially now casting a worldwide tax net. If you're a Japanese company that's doing any kind of business at all, you've got a single sale in New York City. Guess what, buddy? You're paying New York taxes so that those people can get their free bus fare. It's insane. I mean, good luck with that. You just can't do that. You don't have the authority. You can't do it. I mean, the Constitution doesn't allow you to do it. It's in the, but it just speaks to his naivete that he can go and he can say these things, and it speaks to the naivete of the voters. That people are so ignorant, they can just say, "Oh, we're going to raise taxes on corporations." Oh, you had me at hello. That's all you had to say. You're going to raise taxes on the rich. You're going to raise tax on the corporation. And like nobody actually takes a step back and say, well, wait a minute, can he actually do this? Is this going to work? What are going to be the consequences of this? You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they're already sending, they're talking about this. They call it Y'all Street because you've got so much of, the financial enterprise, the big Wall Street investment banks. I mean, what are people doing? They're picking up and they're moving to Texas, and Texas is now launching its stock exchange. They're doing all these things to basically they're saying, okay, great, New York City, like we'll just do that. I mean, capital is extremely mobile. Capital is extremely mobile. And all the knowledge and the know-how and the money and all these things, it could very easily relocate. And the fact that these guys are so clueless and the voters in New York are saying, yeah, they don't actually know anything about socialism. They don't know anything about its policies. They don't know enough about the office of the mayor and what are the kinds of skills that you would want somebody to have. I mean, I don't agree with the guy's policies, but when Michael Bloomberg was mayor, that's at least a guy who knows how to run a large and complex organization because he built one from scratch. So he's at least qualified, right? He's got the chops to run a large and complex organization because the city of New York was in many respects less complex and smaller than the organization that he founded. And so Bloomberg was in a very good position. Like he knew exactly how to run a large and complex organization, and he had no learning curve. He was able to get in from day one, right? Mondani has no idea what he's doing, and voters don't even care. They think that crazy ideas and a winning smile is enough to be a successful mayor. And at the end of the day, that's I mean, all this, the decline and all this stuff. I mean, there's they put people like this in office. There's only two reasons for it. There's only two plausible reasons. Number one is widespread wholesale voter fraud, which I mean, there's let's say there's plenty of evidence of bizarre, funny stuff going on, but let's just set that aside. The other is a completely ignorant voting populace, right? And I think clearly there's a push in a lot of these places for illegals to vote, people who shouldn't be voting to be able to vote. I think that's voter fraud. I don't think that's a conspiracy theory to say that a lot of these places where you're not allowed to show ID and you can just sort of show up and get a ballot and it doesn't really matter who you are, if you're a felon, if you're an illegal, if you're whatever, like, hey, come one, come all, everybody gets to do that. Are people even checking whether or not people are voting multiple times and all this stuff? I mean, there's a lot of evidence, a lot of stuff going on, but at the end of the day, there's also a lot of evidence that voters have no idea what they're doing, what they're voting for, what somebody's policies are, what are the qualifications and credentials of somebody who's even holding the office. So, you get what you vote for. And, if we go back to this example, it's like you just hired somebody to run your business who has no business experience, who actively hates business, who's never had a job, who can barely manage his own personal finances, but he's got a winning smile. He's young and charismatic. So, hey, New York City, good luck with that. Good luck with that. And the handful of
But when
people that are
people
left
hear
over, go ahead.
Yeah, when people hear socialism, do you think they think of like famines in 1920s Russia, or are they thinking of Norway and these Nordic countries that they think have this socialist model where everybody's taken care of? And like, to be fair, it's kind of worked in the Nordic countries in terms of at least a high taxes and a lot of government handouts for childcare and that sort of thing.
Uh, a couple things. You don't have to go back to the 1920s. You can go to the 2020s in Venezuela, not 1920s Russia or 1940s, 1950s China. You can go to 2020s Venezuela, where you had people that were starving to death because there wasn't enough food. And just to put it in context, right, how screwed up Venezuela is, this is a place that should be one of the most fertile agricultural producers in the world. They've got the soil, they've got the water, they've got, you've got the labor, you've got everything that you need to be an agricultural powerhouse. And yet people were starving, and yet people that were card carrying professionals, people that were electrical engineers and nurse practitioners, and in some cases even medical doctors that had to resort to absconding over the Colombian border and working as prostitutes because there was no work and there was no food in a tropical country with enormously productive soil, fertile nutrients, and tons of water, and they couldn't even manage to produce enough food. I mean, that's that's modern, socialism. I think, and also you gotta, in theory, you really have to define terms because people talk about socialism. You mentioned Scandinavia. You've got Norway and Denmark and these places, and they're not socialist, right? The idea, I mean, what they are, they're actually very capitalist societies that happen to have extremely large public welfare programs where they have their health care and they have their pensions and they have all these things that a lot of other countries try. I mean, frankly, like a lot of countries around the world. I mean, even in Latin America, the places with free healthcare and free education, et cetera. I mean, it in many respects, it's almost the norm rather than the exception. But these are places that have, in general, somewhat successful large public welfare programs. And that's always the thing that, Bernie Sanders and the AOCs of the world, even though like you remember like Bernie on his honeymoon went to Russia. He went to the Soviet Union for his honeymoon. I mean, this was the big socialist communist state of its day. But today these guys they kind of they point to Scandinavia and they say, well, if they can do it, then we can do it. Um, I would just say respectfully, like there are a lot of things we can talk about Scandinavian socialism all day long. We can talk about public welfare programs. What I would say is that there are certain elements of it you say, sure, these are successful. There are certain things that they've done that are successful. And the ingredient that they have that you don't have in the United States, and you sure as hell don't have in New York City, is these places used to be, at least before the migrant issue, before they invited people in and say, oh, please, let's invite all these people from all these countries that actively hate us and want to kill us and replace our civilization. Before that, you had these were very high trust societies. So what do I mean by that? If somebody was in Sweden and had to go on short-term disability, people would kind of rightly assume that this is somebody that was actually hurt. This is somebody that was actually had a real serious on-the-job accident and legitimately could not work. It wasn't somebody that was gaming the system. It was somebody that was saying, I'm going to get mine, and you abuse the rules of the system to get free money. If somebody's getting unemployment, it was because this person was legitimately out of work and couldn't find a real job. And people would understand that it wasn't somebody that was gaming the system so that he could sit at home and play Xbox all day in his parents' basement, right? So that's a high trust society. Somebody saying, I'm going to use these public benefits, but only when I really need to. And everybody else is going to say, I will pay for these, and I'm going to trust that you're going to use it only when you really need to. And everybody was trusting everybody. We all contribute and we all use it, but only when we really need to. It was an honor system. And you're in no chance are you going to have that kind of high trust honor system in New York City. You're just not going to have it because one of the things that you need, and this sort of lays to bear the grand weaknesses of multiculturalism, is you need to have a society where you've got a tremendous level of social trust. Is you have to have a shared value system. People have to agree that the things that I value are the things that you value, And obviously, one of the things that we both value is this social cohesion, this trust that you're not going to screw me and I'm not going to screw you. And if we wanted to, we could both screw each other very easily by abusing the system. But we're not going to do that. And that's one of our social values. And as a society, if you don't have shared social values, and those social values come from, a history and a heritage and a civilization that's been built over time. And when you go in and you say, we're going to embrace multiculturalism, right? We're going to say, we're going to invite all these people. And the people, by the way, the people you invite, it wasn't like the Swedes were inviting the Danes or even the French, right? They were saying, let's go to a place that's practically the exact opposite of our civilization. People will have the exact opposite of our values. Let's import, homeless Islamic radicals. Let's import people from, destitute and impoverished countries in Africa where they've had to, kill and steal and maim just to get by on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to expect that these people that are willing to strap bombs to their chest, who don't know that raping little girls is not okay, that you shouldn't do that, that you're not allowed to just, go out in the streets and push people down stairwells and because you don't like the shorts that they're wearing and all these, you're not allowed to do that. These people don't share your values. And so your whole like high trust system just breaks down. Well, this happened in New York City a long time ago, right? You can't have a system of high social trust, of shared values, when your value system of your politicians is let's turn the criminals loose back out on the streets. Let's let the taxpayers pay for the illegals. Let's put the illegals up in hotels. Let's give them free benefits. Let's give them free healthcare. Let's give them free education. Let's do all these things. And let's look the other way. We don't even have any values in our voting system. Our values when it comes to when it comes to elections is come one, come all, as long as they vote left. We're gonna help you do that, right? That you don't have any kind of shared values that you can rely on to say, well, hey, let's have a system where we can have these benefits, a Scandinavian style public welfare system. We're going to have these benefits, and we're going to trust that nobody's going to be abusing the system. Where we don't have corrupt officials. I mean, Scandinavia, you don't have the level of corruption, you don't have the level of incompetence, you don't have, you've got sort of technocratic people that are out there that are working in government like they would be regular jobs, that are doing their best trying to administer and manage systems and so forth. um, it just like you just don't have these same these same standards in the West, and you certainly don't have it in New York City. And so people kind of hold these models up and say we can be just like Norway. No, you're not going to be like Norway. In no way are you going to be like Norway. You're going to be much more like Venezuela, because Venezuela's, I mean, and I don't mean that in terms of hyperbole, but if you look at, what's made Venezuela so bad, well, I mean, you've got a lot of, confiscation of assets, you've got the high taxes, you've got management and control from the state trying to direct everything. You've got completely corrupt and incompetent people that are running the show. These are actually the hallmarks of what you see in New York City, or the Mamdani policies. We want to have state-run, grocery stores. We want to state-run this, state-run that. We want to raise the taxes. We want to confiscate things. We want to, tell people how to run their businesses. We want to do all these things like, and by the way, these are from people that are completely incompetent and have no experience. Those are much more the traditions. That's the blueprint of Venezuela. Those aren't the same conditions as Scandinavia. That's not Norway. And so they think they're giving Venezuelan inputs and expecting Norwegian output. Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
So, do you think there's a bright side to this, though? Because on the one hand, obviously, it should make New York get even worse. A lot of these things, I can't imagine that grocery stores run by the city are going to end well, or raising taxes, if he's even able to do it, on these businesses that are already fleeing New York, or the wealthy people that are fleeing New York. So, I don't know, what does it have to get to before people realize, you're talking about the voters now, they're not necessarily the brightest in the bunch. Are they gonna see New York in 2 years from now and go, "Oh, that was a mistake," or are they just gonna double down and try it again?
Uh, Hard to say. I mean, you remember we were talking about the guys that came in from the middle. Joe Biden was supposed to be a middle of the road guy. Gavin Newsom, when he first became governor, was supposed to be a middle of the road guy. Bill de Blasio, who was mayor of New York City after Bloomberg, was supposed to be a middle of the road guy. He wasn't this hardcore Marxist, ultra woke, progressive commie. He was supposed to be a technocratic, middle of the road kind of guy. And he turned out to be the COVID overlord, the autocrat, the ultra woke, high crime. We love criminals, we love migrants, all this stuff. And that I think was a surprise for a lot of people. Uh, the thing to appreciate, I guess, about Mondani is he's telling you. I mean, it's like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that, all these. I want to raise the taxes, I want to destroy the wealthy, I want all these things that he wants to do. Um, so I don't think anybody can really necessarily be surprised. But I remember this quote from Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, where at some point, they're being interviewed, and he said something along the lines of like, our strategy with AOC is let her talk. They're asking like, how are you going to deal with these leftists? How are you going to deal with these Democrats? He said, let her talk, because whenever she opens her mouth, she said things. People go, oh my God, this is crazy. And I think the bright side here is, I would actually say not even let them talk, but I would say let them govern. If you want to get rid of the left, if you want people to realize how terrible they really are, just let them govern. And if you let them govern, they'll run it into the ground. And I mean, that's already been happening in New York City. I don't think there's any hope that this guy is going to make New York City better. I think if they're really lucky, it's just going to kind of stay as it is. Most likely, it's probably going to get a lot worse. I mean, any high school economics student knows, if you establish rent control anywhere, and especially New York City, you're going to get a housing shortage. If you raise taxes, you're just going to chase more people out of the city. If you do this and you do this, I mean, you're running. You want to give away free this, free that. There's nothing more expensive in government than free, and all you're going to do is run these massive budget deficits. And who does he think he's going to get the money from? Who's going to bail out New York City? Does he think Donald Trump's going to come in and write him a check and bail out New York City? No, of course not. That's ludicrous. It's
He's
ludicrous.
still going to blame Trump, though. He's still going to find a way to
That's
blame Trump.
that's the issue. That's the issue. Is I think people in New York City are some of the most hardcore TDS sufferers on the planet. And in theory, the antidote for TDS is socialism. The TDS is Zoran Mondani. That's the antidote. That's the cure. Talk to your doctor about Zoran Mondani to see if he can cure your TDS. And in theory, in a perfect world, he will. All those people will go, man, I gotta get on the right. And there was a lot of people that started down that road after Charlie Kirk got assassinated, and it became just kind of obvious and clear that the left they're the party of death, and they're the party of murder and assassination and criminality and deceit and all these things. And a lot of people kind of realized that. And the good, the bright side is that, yeah, this guy's going to govern, and he might very well end up curing a lot of people of their TDS. He might cure a lot of people of their yearning for socialism, just like in Argentina, where they realized, it was sort of the opposite. Instead of saying like, this system's broken, we got to try something new. In New York City, they went harder to the left. In Argentina, they went really hardcore to the right, and that's been working for them. The concern is that, you know, the president's already said, like, I'm going to pull their funding, I'm going to do all these things. And, rightfully so. I don't know. I don't know why federal funding is going to New York City anyways. I mean, I don't know why federal funding is going to, realistically to any state. He's going to try it. He's going to get sued. So he's probably not going to be successful. It's going to get, his decision's going to get frozen. And most likely there's going to be some injunction against the president of the United States in favor of Zoran Mandani. I still think that whatever goes wrong, Mamdani's just going to blame Trump, because he's going to have this foil that he's going to be say like, whatever I try and do, the president's trying to block me, and so I haven't been able to exact my agenda because of the president of the United States. So there's going to be some people, I think, in New York that are cured of their TDS, and I think some people are going to double down even more and just get even more rabid and more radical, and and we'll see. But I think this is a benefit for a lot of other places. I think if I were the governor of Florida right now, I mean, Ron DeSantis is probably doing the happy dance, thinking about all the people in New York that are going to be heading straight down I-95, packing up their houses and heading down the turnpike right now, trying to get the hell out of New York City. And same thing in Texas and Tennessee and Georgia to a degree, and some of these other places. And those economies are going to benefit pretty dramatically. So I mean, there's plenty of upside here. And the thing is, like, there are a lot of issues with the United States as a whole, but there are still 50 states. And there are places within the US that are obviously a lot better off than others, and places where the economies are doing quite well, and cost of living is a lot more stable, et cetera. And I think those places are just going to do even better as a result of this. But it's I wouldn't want to be in New York, that's for sure. Over the next couple of years. So, but there's a lot of. I'll leave it with this. Like the thing that disappoints me the most is he's a communist. He's all these things. Like, yeah, I got it. The thing that disappoints me the most is that people willfully chose somebody with absolutely no experience whatsoever. Again, we go back to this example where it's like you've got a business that's in decline. Hiring a CEO is the most important decision that shareholders or a board will ever undertake, because a good CEO is worth his or her weight in gold, and a bad CEO, your business can end in a blink of an eye. And people didn't bother to think critically about that at all in New York City. They just said, there's new ideas, winning smile, capitalism bad, socialism good. So they went with a guy with absolutely no experience whatsoever and put this person in charge of a very large and complex organization. And they just expect that that's going to go well. And that's the naivete of voters. That's not specific just to New York City. It's nationwide. And I think until voters themselves wise up and realize that the decisions that they make about who's going to be the chief executive is really, really important. And it goes beyond, somebody's policy ideas and all these things, because again, those things are, I mean, you can't you constantly get sued every time you issue an executive order. There's 10,000 lawsuits. I mean, it's hard to really do anything. At the end of the day, really, it just comes down to are you able to lead and manage a large and complex organization? Anybody in business is a lot. There's endless videos all across the internet of guys like Jeff Bezos, talk about ideas are worthless. It's execution that matters. And anybody in business understands that. You can have the best ideas in the world. If you can't execute, you're never going to be successful. New York City doesn't need somebody with fresh ideas. It needs somebody who can freaking execute. They had somebody before. I mean, you think back to, Bloomberg had, you know, whatever you want to say about his ideas, the guy could execute. De Blasio couldn't execute, had terrible ideas. Eric Adams, he had some sensible ideas, at least when it came to criminality, couldn't execute. Mamdani's got even worse ideas and has no experience, most likely not going to be able to execute at all. And I think until voters understand how important execution is in politics, the ability to execute is the most important thing, as it is in business. I don't think it's hard for me to think that the country's really going to get anywhere.
I think we can leave it there for today.
On that happy note, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thanks.